Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us on the Activate and Illuminate podcast with Mel. I'm your host, Mel. Together, we're going to be diving into some stories of ordinary people doing a little bit of extraordinary things. People who've maybe pushed their bodies, their mindsets, or maybe society's paradigms. So you're going to find yourself maybe wanting to laugh, cry, or even be inspired. We would invite you to share, like, and subscribe, to sign up for our newsletter as well on activateandilluminate.com. Now, just keep in mind that this information that you are going to hear is informational and educational for entertainment purposes only. This does not constitute professional advice of any kind. The views expressed are those of myself and guests only. Listeners are encouraged to seek professional and legal advice regarding their own situations. So, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time, and thanks again for being here. Hey there, activators and illuminators. Thanks so much for being here today. Well, we have with us an incredible honor, Jeff Wilson from the eastern part of Canada, who has been heavily involved in an issue that I've become passionate about watching, this ostrich issue in BC. Now, Jeff was some of the expert testimony in this case. Now, he has a wealth of knowledge in veterinary and epidemiology and pathology. He's been a professor at Guelph, and there is no one better suited to talk about disaster response, how we've handled it, and maybe some ideas and solutions of what we can have moving forward. So welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah, it is
Thanks
an honor. Yeah, it's an honor to have you here. At the forefront of everybody's minds this last week, and hearts, I would say, probably hearts more than minds, is what the situation that we have seen in BC with the ostrich culling. And can you run us through a little bit of what has transpired in your mind, what you've been part of, and perhaps we'll go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I became involved in the ostrich issue early this past winter, I would say. I had already been involved heavily in bringing together the poultry network nationally about avian influenza, HPAI as we call it, and had done a bunch of things to bring together stakeholders, building a leadership team, starting a bunch of research projects, starting a bunch of publications, stuff like this, really with the objective of taking that outbreak response, the broader influenza outbreak response in poultry and so on, and dairy cattle, and putting it under proper established best practices. So it turns out very few people know this. They suspect it, but very few people know that there's actually a very well-established way to manage outbreak response for things like the ostriches. It's just not being done or hasn't been done or wasn't done at the ostrich farm. And it's not being done for commercial poultry either. So I had done a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. I have a degree in poultry pathology and a PhD in epidemiology. And I know a lot of people because our company, Novometrics, which is a social enterprise, it primarily brings networks together to solve wicked problems just like this. And so I had a friend, Bonnie Mal, who retired recently as an immunologist at U Guelph, and she said they had been connected by the lawyers of the Universal Ostrich Farm. So they said, Jeff, could you join the call? So they know that I know the epidemiology part, and most importantly, I know the outbreak response part, which is absolutely the part that is missing. Hopefully we can talk a bit about what that should look like and how to move it forward.
Yeah. So what do you think went wrong in that, in your perspective?
With the Universal Ostrich Farm?
Mm-hmm.
So from a kind of objective perspective, which is probably helpful in this, because there's many reasons to be sad or angry or outraged, actually on all sides of the issues. So the best way to look at this, I think, is objectively through the lens of what is actually established outbreak response best practice. We call this the pillars of outbreak response. And so what happened with the ostrich issue, as as one segment, kind of an escalating segment of the failure of proper outbreak response in the poultry industry. The very same things broke down, arguably more outrageously in the at the ostrich farm. And I can talk to you a bit about what those pillars of outbreak response are and what should have happened and what actually happened, and why, when you don't follow best practices, you can get just a disaster. So best practice, all it is doing what has already been established works. It's nothing actually fancy. It's not like over the top, like a massive bar. It's like, best practice for starting your computer is pressing the on button, not throwing your computer against the wall. I have a silly sense of humor. It's not meant to be disrespectful to the ostrich owners or anything. It's me, and I find it helps to soften the blow a bit so we can talk about next steps. But I can talk to you about, if you want, some of the details of these 4 pillars and what should have happened, and what did happen.
Yeah, and what was your recommendation in this, Supreme Court decision? What was your recommendation in that?
It was to, a bit irreverently, stop the nonsense and let's do the pillars of outbreak response. Part of the reason I know about this is I was a professor for years at University of Guelph, but I was cross-appointed to the Public Health Agency of Canada, and I actually started the group which does foodborne, waterborne, and zoonotic disease infections for FAC, as it's called, and that includes outbreak response. And I learned how to do that by going through the FAC training program on outbreak response. It works. Used it. And it's not like I invented it. I learned it from people at FAC and people at CDC, and we used it to manage things like the Walkerton outbreak, which I don't know if people remember that or out west, but it was a big waterborne disease outbreak, you're probably aware. So we used the pillars there. Things actually worked very well. We stopped a thing that was killing little kids. We're not doing that for avian influenza, and avian influenza is a lot bigger than Walkerton. Fortunately, it's not causing human mortality at this point, but it's causing poultry mortality. It's causing major destruction to the agri-food industry and major distrust. And of course, it's causing mental health problems, understandable mental health problems to lots of people across Canada who can't believe that this is happening and, are grieving. So that was my recommendation. Do the pillars. Basically, in this context, I have basically one message. Do the pillars of outbreak response. It will handle everything. Do you want me to tell you what they are?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go into that, and then we'll go more into this ostrich issue.
Totally. So for your listeners, this is like epidemiology 101. If you took epidemiology in first year university, you would be learning this stuff. You would have probably 1 lecture on this in your how to manage an outbreak, maybe 2. But actually what happens is you don't really learn it by learning it in a classroom, because I learned it in a classroom. It wasn't till I went to my first actual outbreak, which was a hospital outbreak in Owen Sound, Ontario, of salmonellosis. And then I got thrown into that. I suddenly realized, now I get what they're talking about. And part of the problem is it's even epidemiologists who have never done outbreak response normally don't get it. Most physicians have no idea because they've never studied it and they've never been in the context of it. So here are the 4 pillars of outbreak response. Pillar 1 is build the outbreak team. You have to bring in an outbreak, and this is what we did in Walkerton. It wasn't just me. There's a bunch of people, just so you know. You create a leadership team that has the right people around the table. So not just the people who are in the institution purporting to run the outbreak, the right people from outside the institution, like independent experts in infections and independent experts in water and independent experts in this case, in ostriches and poultry. You bring those people together and authentically they're led to focus on solving the outbreak, not protecting institutional reputations, not in making money, not in being on a power trip, but in actually solving the outbreak. Okay, so it's basic leadership. And I think this is why so many people intuitively understand the kind of thing that's going on. And so then you bring people together and you are transparent. So you don't hide it all internally. You share the information across the network and you bring the experts together, and step by step, you focus on fixing a thing with feedback. So it's kind of common sense, but it's one of those like common sense that just isn't getting done in avian influenza. It's not meant to be negative against people involved in this. Many of them are very well-meaning. Many of them are very smart. Many of them are very well trained, but they don't have a process to bring them together to manage this together properly. So one is the leadership team. Step two is you start collecting the right data. Okay, so you can't manage an outbreak without knowing what's going on. And you don't just pull it out of thin air. You don't just make your best guess. Sometimes you have to do your best guess, but very rapidly you try to get the real information on what's going on. So in Walkerton, that meant stuff like how many people are sick, what are the culture results, detailed questionnaires as to what did they eat, what did they drink, all this kind of stuff. In the ostrich issue, there is no data framework other than what people outside of the CFIA have been pulling together. So the ostrich people, experts like myself and Steve Pellick and Bonnie Mallard, these kind of things have been trying to piece together and actually trying to invoke proper testing. You can't run an outbreak of infectious disease if you don't know who's infected. It just, how could you, right? It's almost so ridiculous and such a comedy of errors. I think what happens is people in the general public can't believe that it could be so lame. Well, it's lame. It's really lame. Doesn't mean the people are bad or stupid, but they don't know what they're doing, or they're not doing what they know they should do. And I'm not a mind reader, so I can't tell which it is. So so in this one, it's like, well, for months and months, people have been saying, why don't we test these ostriches to see if they have the virus?
So
not whether they're PCR positive, which means they have some DNA or RNA, but are they shedding the virus? Well, what's happened is not only has that not been done, the CFIA has explicitly prohibited at rule of law, like at threat of imprisonment of anyone taking any samples to test for the virus. Well, and of course, thousands or more of people realize this is ridiculous, and it's absolute violation of proper outbreak response. Like it's just so unfortunately, they're not doing outbreak response. We'll get to that in a moment. And so then then you start doing interventions, and that's the things you do to stop the transmission and protect people or animals, right? But you do it based on the data. So if you don't have any data,
so to be clear,
totally,
these were all culled with no testing of any kind of verifiable transmission of disease?
That's correct. So, and with just total clarity, what they were tested with, there were 2 dead ostriches, apparently, and CFI says this, as far as I can understand. I've talked to people at CFIA that were tested with the PCR test, which a lot of people will remember from COVID. So the PCR, first of all, they were dead and lying on the ground. The PCR test is notorious for creating false positive results. So because it's testing for DNA, and depending on how you adjust the test, it can become incredibly sensitive. So it can pick up DNA of almost anything, right? And then give a positive. So that's all that was done. There was no testing to determine if the virus itself was present. And so no culturing of the birds to identify the actual virus, or other tests, immunologic tests that can test for the presence of the virus, not just for the DNA, or in this case, RNA. So yeah, that's now I should say what happens is all this tends to get lost in the communication process, or it's either lost or it's deliberately obfuscated, right? And so that's pillar 4, communication. But we'll get to that in a moment.
This episode brought to you by protandemcanada.lifevantage.com. What if you could turn on your body to work like it was supposed to? What if you could have it remember how to handle toxins, stress, and the environment like it used to when you were young? What if it worked for your pets too? What if this is not about supplementing something that is missing, but activating something that has gone dormant? About actually turning on your body to make these things again. Learn how to activate your body now. Check us out, protandemcanada.lifevantage.com.
And I can't know exactly what's going on. Are people doing this on purpose, or is this just incompetence? I'm not a mind reader. Everything I'm hearing is this combination of both. Sorry for laughing. Kind of,
Yeah.
You don't know whether to laugh or cry, actually. Pillar 3 is put in the right interventions. There were many possible interventions based on the data that we have right now, other than culling them. So, for example, just leaving them, keeping them isolated, and then using them as a basis to study avian influenza. That would be the most obvious one, but there's a whole bunch of others in terms of increasing their immunity, better biosecurity, and so on. And the final one is proper communication. So the communication from the people running the outbreak has to be honest and complete. It did not happen. I'm sorry, it did not happen. As far as I can see, and I've studied this, in pretty great depth, and it has to be multi-directional. So it's not just a downward push of information from the people running the outbreak, like in Walkerton. It wasn't just the medical officer saying, okay, this is what it is and everybody's going to do this. There was a continual feedback from the people in the community and so on. That has been not only absent, it's been actively thwarted, okay? Certainly by the CFIA. So I just want to let people know. So those 4 pillars, that's the thing to start watching. After we kind of go through the grieving and go through the anger, the next thing is to take that anger and turn it into effective action. And the effective action is not just complaining and not just sending letters to the minister. That's useful. But I believe what we have to do now is come together and actually do the pillars of outbreak response on this with people from across Canada, experts, farmers, and show the public this can be done properly. And based on our results, that's what's going to get this shifting, is basically results that work. Not just arguing, CFI's right, they're wrong, they're right, they're wrong. Well, let's do it and we'll find out. I just put that out there because it's really important. What do I say about people who are saying that the birds were immune? So to me, it's kind of 2 parts. So the first part is, were they immune? To me, anyway, there's many parts, but to me, are they immune? Were they immune? And was this used somehow to thwart this, or something nefarious, I guess, or some other agenda, some ulterior motive, right? So what we know about their immunity is this. And so this is good. The epidemiology is actually very interesting. It's kind of like detective work, but with data as part of it, okay? But doesn't have to be complicated data. The evidence which suggests they were immune includes the following. There's more that I will forget, but there's these. One is that, these birds are used for the production of antibodies against SARS, COVID, and now, because they were exposed to avian influenza. I've seen people saying, and I've seen CFI saying, we received no evidence that this is true. They received tons of evidence. Bonnie Mallard, my colleague, Mary Jane Ireland, who's the chief veterinarian for Canada, Bonnie was on her master's committee. She knows her personally. She phoned her and told her. So this idea that there was this is about communication. It has to be truthful and complete. So these folks were sending egg yolks from the ostriches to collaborators in Japan at a university in Japan, a veterinary school, where the collaborator veterinarian is the president of the university. Now, I've never talked to him, but I've talked to many people who have, and I've seen the correspondence with them and so on. So if that's not true, then that has to come out in the data framework. Like if that's actually totally made up, we have to find out, obviously. But I've seen everything to me indicates that this is absolutely true. And what happened was then I find if you'd think of it that way, you get away from, oh, well, he said that, and then I heard this, and no, we're going to get it into a written data framework where it's all written down and all, like for a court of law, right? And we're going to look at it together, right? And decide what is actually true. Well, I've seen enough of it to know this is one of the worst outbreak responses I personally have ever seen. Okay, that universal ostrich. So then what happened was, it turns out CFIA forbade anyone from taking any samples off the farm to be tested for anything. That makes no sense. Like medically, it makes no sense. The only thing that for me makes sense is one, utter incompetence, which is certainly part of what's going on and could explain it all. It may not be malfeasance, it's maybe just total incompetence, but it certainly points to a strong possibility of not wanting to know whether they're infected or not, right? Well, it turned out that because of sending these samples, the ostrich ladies, Katie and Karen and those folks, had been sending egg yolks to Japan to be tested as part of this research project. And they're frozen, right? So these egg yolks are sitting over in Japan in a freezer of this eminent immunologist in Japan. Now, that immunologist, my understanding is he's been very reluctant to come forward because he doesn't want to get slammed for being a conspiracy theorist, right? Something like that. Or it may be a cultural thing where it's like in Japanese, not wanting just deference to authority. I don't know. But for whatever reason, Steve Pellick, who you may have heard of, who's the immunologist who's been on this expert team, he's a UBC professor of immunology, and probably one of the best infectious disease immunologists in Canada. So he said, well, send me the yolks. So he sent the yolks, and they were all positive to antibodies to this highly pathogenic avian influenza. And so I'm kind of going, okay, maybe Steve Pellick is lying. I don't think so. I know him personally. He's not. If he's lying, everybody's lying, and certainly CFIA is lying. So I go, no. I don't think there's any. Steve Pellick has no reason to lie. He has no reason to lie, and every reason to tell the truth. So we know that the yolks taken at some time before, I forget the exact timing, but they were lined up with the outbreak and when the birds were supposed to have been testing. So we know that the ones who were tested have antibodies. So we're going, well, that certainly seems to be a smoking gun.
Now you say that they have antibodies to SARS, to COVID, to these
But
other.
they were tested by Steve Pellick for antibodies to the avian strain that's the
Okay.
one that's purportedly the problem by CFIA.
Okay.
And so then the other thing is, the birds, they went through a period of mortality. I forget the exact timing, several months ago. That's when they were reported to CFIA by somebody. But since then, there's been no mortality. Well, it makes total sense. They've been exposed to it. They have antibodies and they have herd immunity. And all we're saying is, okay, let's test to see if they have the virus and let's test all of them and see if they have antibodies. Well, CFIA has forbidden that. And it makes absolutely no medical sense to forbid it. So that's to me kind of the start of the answer to like, do they have immunity? Almost certainly, and they should have been tested. Now they're in some pit somewhere.
To know who reported it to the CFIA.
Yeah, and I don't know that. I don't know. I don't know. Like often in this kind of thing, it's like someone who doesn't like you, is distrustful, or has a legitimate concern about something and is doing the right thing and not realizing where this could go. But I don't know who it is. It's usually something like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So have you witnessed some of the CFIA public response lately? I saw that they have had a large amount of public outcry at their establishment in
I
Kelowna.
saw that. I saw some of that, and like fecal matter on the door and
Yeah,
whatnot.
there,
And
there's
yeah,
the public seems to be expressing their disdain over this. So, do you think there's any part of this that is, from the CFIA perspective? First of all, most people didn't even know what that acronym stood for a few months ago. Now we do. Now we know the ineptness of it. Is it basically unraveling itself in the community's eyes?
I believe so, and I would preface that kind of by, and this isn't. I actually believe this. There are actually many people in CFIA who are doing their best to do a good job. And I know some of them personally, right? And I know I worked in the public health agency, and it's the same sort of thing. There's many people in these government agencies who are actually trying to do a good job. Rule number one of management of any organization: if there's a problem at the ground level, there's only one place to look: up. If there's a problem with someone doing illegal stuff in a factory, the buck stops with the CEO, period. It's their job to be putting in place systems to prevent that, and if it happens, then to deal with it, right? So absolutely, this stops, or it goes to senior management and see if is it unraveling? Yeah, that's right. Is it unraveling? And I would say yes, it is most definitely unraveling in the mind of the public. Not all of the public, obviously, but an increasing number of people in the public. And it's also unraveling in the minds of academics, who I connect with, a lot of them, and in the agricultural industry, a lot of people, and in the in some of the poultry boards. So we connect networks, right? So we're talking to people in all these sorts of things. So people are now, it's gotten to a point where Canada's a national laughingstock. The
100%.
poultry industry is now getting dragged into this because the poultry industry, certainly some of them that I talked to, and I suspect all of them, knew that what was going on on the ostrich farm was made very little sense, right? Some of them stood up, and I haven't talked to all of them by any means, but in our travels, as we talk to more and more, I can tell you, for example, World Poultry Magazine, which is arguably the preeminent trade magazine for poultry producers globally, they totally get it. They've written a couple articles on it. The Western Poultry Disease Conference, which is a Canada-US poultry conference for the west half of the continent, they totally get it. They asked me to publish an article on what CFIA was doing wrong and how this was unraveling. So it's definitely unraveling. When I talked to the chief veterinarian for Canada about this months ago, Mary Jane Ireland, and her deputy, Kathy Furness, I told them this is not going to work. And we actually offered them a lifeline in terms of a collaborative network approach to dealing with this, and they refused. So it's predictable. If you have any experience in, let's say, crises or, significant change in the agri-food industry, people that understand how to do this will tell you the number one thing is transparency. It's like, remember the Tylenol crisis, right? That was a good example. The people who make Tylenol stood up and said, we have a problem, right? And instantly they started to get credibility. And then, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to, I don't remember the exact thing, but that's the way to handle it. That's the way to handle it. Everybody knows this, and everybody in the poultry industry knows this. CFIA, for some reason, and I think it speaks to failure of leadership and management, basic stuff at the highest level, where they simply don't have the skills to understand what to do as an organization. And then they hire people and train them to go and kill ostriches. Or
Do you think it's that simple? Do you think it's lack of information, or do you think it's I can't even say that word.
like obfuscation.
Yeah,
I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination, right? So you can't know because you can't mind read, but you can look at it as a population level and as a trend. And I'd go, power corrupts, Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So if you give people the authority over life and death and control of other people's financial resources, and if there is no accountability, which with CFIA there is no real accountability because it goes through the ministers, and arguably we really have very little accountability with our elected officials. We get to vote, or we can protest. And so, I would say it's a thing of a culture which over time has liked control, has had no real accountability to the government or the public or to the agricultural industry, has had excessive, in my view, power over people's resources and animals and whatnot, and it's essentially gone rogue. And I don't think I'm like, that's like a radical concept. It's like, that seems to be what's happening. But I go, okay, this, incidentally, as we got into this more and more, we started to see that these outbreaks are just all levels of outbreak. Fundamentally, in Guelph, our former member of parliament, who is a liberal, Lloyd Longfield, good guy, he said to me, Jeff, you know what the real outbreak is in Canada? And I said, what? He said, it's the epidemic of failed governance. And that's what we have, an epidemic of failed governance. And that needs to, here's a class question. What would you do with an epidemic of failed governance? You would use the pillars of outbreak response. That's what we're doing on this epidemic, okay? Leadership teams nationally, including the public and everybody else, full transparency, right? Focusing on the issue, not focusing on our liberals better than Greens, whatever, focusing on the issue. We got to fix the governance in this country. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but it's central to all of this, Melanie, right?
Yeah, 100%. So
that's what we're doing.
I got two questions. I'll ask the first one first. Did you think this would be fixed with common sense?
What's that now?
Did you think this would be fixed with common sense? Did part of you think that this would be resolved through common sense and through facts?
Yes, I'm an insane level optimist, and I couldn't do this if I wasn't. Right? But so I actually thought that it was going to be resolved. I actually did. However, and I've seen other people on YouTube or whatever saying, I thought it was, but I was prepared for the opposite. So I'm going, okay, now that's the opposite. Now what we do is, in my opinion, we use this, you know the thing of the lady who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, where her son died, as I understand it, and she turned it into a movement, right?
Yeah.
And I think, but not a destructive movement, a positive movement based on data and evidence and bringing everybody together to fix this. I can't comment on where it's at now, but that was certainly the intention. So I'm going, yeah. So I thought that it was going to resolve, properly, but it didn't. So now I'm going, okay, now the next thing is we work together to fix all this. So go ahead. You're something about common sense, but
yeah. Do you think that there was a judicial process overreach, or do you think our judicial system accurately handled this?
I think that from what I've seen of the judicial system, and that includes, myself challenging parking tickets, right? And small claims court, and now being an expert witness in this and some other things. I think with this and talking to legal professionals vastly more, knowledge than me, including one of my relatives who retired recently as a Supreme Court justice, who said he cannot understand why this would happen. It makes not the slightest sense from a legal perspective. So I think that just as the CFIA has lost its roots, is not being managed effectively, I think there's good evidence that that's true with the judicial system, or at the very least, the connection between, the judicial system, the legislature, and the police, and the rest of the public. There's a massive disconnect. I couldn't argue the details of the legal arguments, but it makes no sense to me that there can be something this egregious where a retired, highly respected, federal lawyer, my relative, says it makes no sense. I would say that it makes no sense. Why did the Supreme Court or whatever levels of court refuse to look at the medical evidence? Well, I know enough about the law to know you can't write everything down and there's interpretation required. So I'm going, this makes no sense. Of course, there would have been a way to look at the medical evidence. I don't know what the way is, but of course, because we do this every single day in courtrooms across Canada, right? If you get hit by a bus and you're going to your insurance company and we've all seen it on TV, right? Of course you can do that. So I'm going, it just doesn't resonate. It doesn't seem right.
It seems
to
a
me.
little off.
It
So
seems
there's
a little off. And I'm sure there's all sorts of legal arguments. And I'm going, yeah, but what about the common sense thing that your job is to help us through this, not.
Yeah.
That's so
It's
I'd
the
go, yeah,
last.
I think it's all at some level. It's all at some level, not all of it, but big chunks of it are dysfunctional. That's my opinion. And I'm working through with my own lawyer and a bunch of other lawyers to kind of better understand what to do about it.
So, there's people that when, and to be clear, I have absolutely no knowledge of this from any type of professional perspective. This is just my own perspective and people that I have heard talk about this. When Mad Cow came in and, people said that it was used as an instrument of economic warfare. Do you see any of this happening, the possibility against our poultry industry? Do you see this as being used because the CFIA, I'm just reading this from their thing here. They say they emphasize broader risk to the other poultry to trade, whereas the farm frames it as a local unresolved case of perceived government outreach. So they're basically stating that this is a broader risk to every poultry, poultry in Canada. So in your perspective, is that being used as an economic tool?
Well, and there's a lot of moving parts to this, right? So, and I'm not trying to be evasive. It's just there's so many different ways in which it might be used as an economic tool and how it might not be being used as an economic tool, right? So I would say in the poultry industry, and I really like the poultry industry. I've been part of it since I did my poultry degree. I probably graduated in 1986 or something. Like I've been a poultry industry consultant and a pharma consultant globally for years. And I like it. I really like the poultry industry. And I like chickens. I like poultry pathology, which seems weird, but I do. I just find it interesting. That being said, as in any industry, a good reason to understand why people do what they do, for good or evil, is to follow the money. I mean, poultry farmers like their chickens, but they're in it for the money. They have to be. They got millions invested potentially. So is money playing a role in all of this? Absolutely. Likely almost every decision about should we vaccinate or not has differing perspectives on in terms of, will I make money or will I not make money? Will my industry make money or will it, right? In terms of the outbreak response. If I believe as a farmer, and I've talked to lots of farmers like this, that what CFIA is doing on my farm is the right thing or not, if I think it's maybe not the right thing, should I ask Jeff or not? It's like that. And what they tend to find is, no, Jeff's actually pretty good. Ask him and he'll explain, and then he'll put you on the national leadership team, which is what we've done. So everybody, and with things like, does CFIA use the explicit or implicit threat of financial penalties to farmers? Does it use that? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do they know they're doing that? Well, I can't read their minds, but probably they do. They know if they like, I can't believe there's that level of incompetence, right? That I suspect that's exactly what they're doing. And so, yeah, there's definitely this stuff is being weaponized on all sides, right? And I kind of go, well, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, they work for us. They work for us. And so now it's time for Canadians to stand up with the right process and say, okay, we want some accountability now. And I don't know if that's answering your question or maybe
Yeah,
just
no, and
wandering around.
it actually leads into my next question, Jeff, which was, as the people in the industry, what do they do next? How do they stand up for their industry? How do they get together? And I mean, everybody knows that there's been an oversight, but a little bit of the last many years has been about divisiveness so that there wasn't cohesiveness.
Totally.
And we see that in some of these overreaching situations, is until there's cohesiveness, there's no responsibility to the divisiveness.
Totally. It just becomes madness, chaos.
Yes.
Yeah. So how can the industry come together to work on this? Exactly. Okay.
Yes.
So, and I would just say, just for people in the industry, hopeful my friends in industry are listening to this podcast, but they might be. Just so everybody knows, like, I honestly think what's happening with this avian influenza thing, if we don't get on top of this, including helping out with things like ostriches when they deserve help and coming together, and if we don't stand up for this, it could destroy the entire industry. And that means our colleagues who are farming, our colleagues in pharma, our colleagues in the vaccine industry. Like, I've done a lot of stuff in the vaccine industry, both animal and human. If we don't stand up, so this isn't calling out one group or the industry. It's being honest and saying, okay, what are we going to do to fix this? So I just kind of throw that out in case anybody's listening. So from the industry, what we've been doing, and it's a stepwise emergent process, right? So we could see a long time ago that the right way to begin dealing with this kind of thing is by using the pillars of outbreak response. Okay, to see that. If you do that, you build a leadership team, you bring the right people to the table, and then people go, oh, wait a minute. Maybe the way this is being handled is dumb. Maybe this is hurting our industry, and it's hurting the government, and it's even hurting people in CFIA, right? But until you build that leadership team and bring people together, it's a psychological thing where there's no place to have that discussion and no place to calm people down and kind of go, okay, what are we going to do about this? So the pillars of outbreak response are critical. So we've started talking about that, and there's good uptake on that, including in the poultry industry. Canadian Poultry Magazine, World Poultry Magazine, Canadian Journal of Veterinary Research, premier publications. So they're liking this. Just give me a moment here. So now as this emerges and we've got initial uptake, right? And we're getting a little bit of publicity about this through things like this. And we're getting to be known. So people like me and our team and Steve Pellick and those kind of people are getting to be known. And there's another guy, Harvey Sasaki, who I should mention, who's from the poultry industry. They're starting to get, people are going, hey, wait a minute. Maybe what they're talking about makes sense. Bringing everybody together to actually do this properly. So, Then what we've done is we said, all of this we've been doing under a thing we call community network integration, or CNI, which is simply a process to bring a whole network together to work together to solve a wicked problem, okay? And we've published on that, and we've tested in a whole bunch of different contexts. And so what it does is it's kind of the framework, the backbone for bringing everybody who wants to be involved, from the public, United Church of Canada, Rotary, Canadian Poultry Magazine, right? Professors, people in CFIA. I actually have met with one of our publications on how to do outbreak response for HPI AI properly is co-authored by a senior CFIA colleague. So just so you know, people in the thing are understood. So then we kind of went, okay, now we're going to pull everybody together step by step, and so they can all be part of the management team of this, or at the very least seeing what's going on, right? And that's all what CNI does. The last or kind of latest iteration of this is we've created a thing that we call CORIN, the Canadian Outbreak Response Integration Network, okay? And it's explicitly designed to bring all these players together, right? Farmers. And as we build this out, there's a management structure to it. So we're going to be reaching out to volunteers to help with this from different parts of the industry and outside the industry. And we're building in the funding parts. So we've got initial funding from a few different corporate sponsors and grants and stuff. so we can pay people to build this out, right? As we build Corin out, it'll be ultimately over time, it will radically overtake CFIA, and people will see, my goodness, this is what should have been done, proper outbreak response. So I would say for people now to become aware of this, we just named it, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. Scott Anderson from the MP from Edgewood, where the ostrich are, he sent it to the Minister of Agriculture and Mark Carney, actually. So it's on the table. We're doing this. And the interesting thing about this is, in all the stuff CFIA is doing, as we researched this as part of the data framework, we discovered that CFIA has no mandate for outbreak response. And you'd go, what? They have a mandate in the Health of Animals Act to stamp out, but they don't have a mandate to do pillar 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's why they're not doing it. And the ironic thing is, no organization in Canada has that mandate for animals. So what's happening is Novometrics, our social enterprise, we're just stepping in and we're just doing it. So under this Corin framework, we're bringing everybody together. There's absolutely no legal impediment, nothing. We've told the Minister of Agriculture, we've told Mark Carney, we've invited them in to be part of it. And then we're just going to do it, but we're not waiting for permission. We're going to do the right thing. And so there's a whole bunch of things happening under that, a whole bunch of research projects, a whole bunch of engagement, funding. The industry is now coming together around this.
So
hopefully that's helpful. I know it's a lot, but that's we're actually building a process so we can actually fix this.
you said something there that just, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. CFIA has no mandate to handle disaster or outbreak.
So here's it's a nuance, but it's critical. In an infectious disease situation like HPAI, they have a mandate to come in and basically test what they want, kill what they want, based on their interpretation of the tests, and compensate farmers or anybody else the amount they figure they want. Okay? That's not outbreak response. Outbreak response is not coming in with a preconceived notion. That's like fixing Walkerton doesn't consist of saying, okay, I know what it is. It's E. coli in hamburgers. So we're going to burn all the hamburgers and forbid eat people. Yeah, but sir, we've done some testing. It looks like it's in the water. Listen, we don't build a data framework. We've got a mandate. If our people, and we don't bring in outside opinions, if our people think that this is positive, we just do it. Well, of course, if we'd done that, we'd still be trying to figure out what's happening in Walkerton. People would still be dying. So they have that legal mandate. It's actually to do that stamping out outside of a proper outbreak response makes no sense whatsoever. Well, that's a failure within the Health of Animals Act. Just was never conceived of to be doing these kinds of complex outbreaks, I guess. So they just don't have the mandate to do proper leadership team, like build an honest, inclusive leadership team. They don't have a mandate to build a proper data framework. They have no clue how to do it. They have no mandate to investigate any interventions other than stamping out. And they have no mandate to report to the public or anyone else honestly and completely. You can imagine what it'd be like at this point working in CFIA as they start to realize this. So, but a good thing is nobody else has that mandate. And under a thing called an organic mandate, now anybody in Canada who knows what they're doing and is legitimately engaging the public and using evidence and doing the right thing, fully legal. In fact, it's encouraged to come in and fix things. Like if there's a fire in a school, you should, you don't need legal authority to pull the fire alarm. You're encouraged to do that.
Yeah. So you said something about compensation. And that was one of my questions, as far as compensation. And I'm certain that there's no compensation that can fix what has happened. But do you think that this is going to be a huge civil matter?
I think this is massive. And it's going to not trigger in the sense of making people freak out, but just it's going to lead to a whole bunch of things. Because what happens is, see, once you start looking at outbreak response in chickens for avian influenza, well, the next thing is, well, what about avian influenza in dairy cattle? Well, what about other diseases
Influenza in
in dairy
people.
cattle?
What about influenza in people?
Totally. What about people? And then you go, well, wait a minute now. It's not just infections. What about outbreaks of homelessness? What about outbreaks of addiction? Oh my goodness. None of this is being done under the pillars of outbreak response. None of it's being done under absolutely validated, correct processes for doing this. And so then what happens is your own MP says, Jeff, the main outbreak is the epidemic of failed governance. You go, you see, it's just a matter, like I have kind of language for it because we've been working on it and we've been publishing on it and thinking about it from a kind of a technical perspective. Okay, how do we do this? I suspect when some of your listeners hear the epidemic of failed governance, they're going to go, oh my goodness, that's what it is. The other side of this, though, is in an epidemic of failed governance, it doesn't work. See, the government is not going to fix this, even if they want to, on their own. Industry is not going to fix it. We have to do it together. And that means, as the public, we have to, or if we're interested, right? You don't have to do anything, right? But I would really love if some people listen to this would go, I'd like to understand the pillars of outbreak response, because then I can see it like, all around me and can be part of this. And it's not good enough to simply complain. It's not good enough to be just sad, afraid, angry. Those are stages. But now we got to be part of the solution, which means understanding how to do this and then joining into things to make it happen in a coherent way. And that's what CORIN is. It's the start of a way to bring people together with a proper framework where we can work together to improve the framework and fix all this stuff. So I know I do tend to go on, but
this has been honestly a fascinating conversation, Jeff, because
thank you.
You're tying together pieces. It's easy to get really involved emotionally as soon as you hear it and to take a stance this way or that way, like anything. And I think there is, it's easy for this to be used as a distraction from things as well, which I think has happened as well.
Totally it is.
But that aside does not take away from the travesty of what's happened
not at all.
Or the seriousness of what is implied if we don't handle things like this correctly moving forward. So I think you have brought a bigger idea, a bigger social construct of, even just as you said that, an outbreak of homelessness, an outbreak of addiction. Absolutely. We have those things. And you have to wonder why. Do I think some outbreaks are, possibly not outbreaks? Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally. Yep.
So it's such
or not serious enough to do extreme measures or something like
or
that.
Orchestrated or
totally.
Because there's no reason to me to see, the homelessness and the addiction. I mean, that has been allowed. So why?
Totally. And we've been in Guelph, Wellington, where I live. It's in Ontario. That's actually what we've been doing, is now taking this and applying it to homelessness and addiction. And it's the same process. That's the one thing for anybody who's listening. The good thing about the pillars of outbreak response, once you learn them once, they're not that hard. They work in every outbreak. They work in it, including the outbreak of your kid leaving your socks around in their room. It's the same thing. I'm just saying, it's the same thing. Build a leadership team, get a data framework, think of an intervention, communicate truthfully.
So what do you say to the public now listening as far as, maybe ways that they can, support Katie and the ostrich farm, show some type of public support and community for what's happened and to make certain this doesn't happen again?
So what I would say is, first of all, take care of yourself. That's one thing. Do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself, your mental health and all that kind of stuff, and your family and your friends and all that kind of thing. Then I would say in terms of, and that's important, is us taking care of ourselves. You actually can't be effective if we're in profound grieving or anger, right? They're low emotional states. When you're in a low emotional state, your creativity and your resourcefulness just goes way down. So wherever you're at in that, to begin, just be aware of that. And then I would say for Katie and the folks, help them with that in whatever way you think. Send an email, send a card, send whatever. And then I would say, just give me a second here now, in terms of advocacy and that sort of thing at this stage, I would say if it makes sense to you and you feel comfortable and whatnot, and there's no reason not to, write an email to your own member of parliament federally and tell them that you've been watching to Melanie's show and a letter is gone, an email has gone to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Agriculture about a new framework where we can manage these outbreaks properly and everybody's going to win. There's a lifeline for everyone. Please do this. Please advocate for this. And that will actually work because they know about this. A bunch of them know about me and Novometrics, and that because we've been involved in this and behind the scenes, we've been connecting with a bunch of different politicians. So that will actually help a lot. Likely sending a thing to the head of CFIA, well, you could. I'd start with your own member of parliament, or Minister of Agriculture and the Prime Minister. And their emails they're all available online. Just look them up. What I usually do now is, because I've talked to a bunch of them, I'll get their email. I'll get their email for their constituency and their Ottawa office, and I'll write them an email to each, and then I'll phone each of the numbers and I'll leave a message and I'll go, this is following up on my email, please watch my undo. And you might be surprised that would help. And then I would say, as we move forward on this Corin framework, to be waiting for this, Katie and Karen and those folks, they know we're working on this. They know Novometrics is building a national framework so we can bring people together to actually create the thing we need and fund it and that kind of stuff. So they'll know about that. They don't know the name Corin yet, I don't think, but they will. And if anybody wants to email me, you're more than welcome to do that. I can leave my email with Melanie if you want.
Yeah, we'll have it in the show notes, Jeff, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say right now is thank you for everything that you're doing.
Likewise, Melanie, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And, I wanted to have this discussion and talk about some things that weren't being talked about in the news. That, we've seen a lot of shock and awe, in different ways. But I wanted to have a conversation to talk about some of the things and to understand a little bit better some of the ideas that were happening in my head and maybe to put some of my own fears or maybe judgments at rest. So I think this conversation has absolutely done that for me, Jeff. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And I would say I have my own form of spirituality, such as it is. I would say in this thing, take care of yourself, however you think of a higher power or whatever. Just access that, whatever it is.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for
You're
that.
welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. And I'll try to try not crying. My apology.
No, not at all. Well, we'll stop this here. And thank you for sharing from your heart.
Yeah, thanks, Melody. Thanks, everybody who's listening. Appreciate it.